Okay. We are back. Another installment of Ask Eddie and Ann. Ann Hockens,
Hello.
Director of Communications for the Film Noir Foundation, Straight Edge. How are you
Straight
doing
Edge.
today?
I'm doing well, actually. I'm really happy we're doing this. It's been so long, so I'm really
It has been a
chuffed.
while. Yeah. People may say, where the heck is Eddie? Where in the world is Eddie? Because obviously I'm not in my normal digs because I am we're recording this while I am at the Palm Springs, the Arthur Lyons Film Noir Festival in Palm Springs, hosted by our colleague Alan Rohde. And I am a guest presenter here for, I think it's going on 15 years or something now, if not longer. So, anyway, that's why I'm happily in my cool hotel room and not out in the 100-degree heat at the moment. That's why the different background. And I was Tizzy is here with me.
Yeah,
So
because you travel with your cat.
I do. I travel with my cat. There may be a Tizzy sighting before we're done, but we'll find out.
Very cool.
She's certainly not going to climb up here on me, but I'll have to get her if the situation arises. But she is here.
Cool.
Okay.
Okay.
Shall we dive right in? I mean,
Yes.
we got to get our feet wet here because it has been a while since we've done one of these.
I know it's just so crazy. So this is from Rob. Hello, Eddie. Is there one missing or lost noir era film that you want recovered? Is there a holy grail of lost noir films?
Well, starting off with that question. Okay. That is a very complicated question, Rob, because um, things in this realm change so fast and are changing so fast right now. Some of these movies that we look for truly are orphans, like Woman on the Run and Too Late for Tears, that we saved because they had no studio protection or anything, and they really were lost. And it's like, where are we ever going to find the original negative or all that material? And it's gone. It was gone, and so we had to make restorations from something else, whatever we could find. But a lot of these movies are lost due to, they're not lost, but they are unavailable due to rights issues, or maybe just all the prints left are kind of unwatchable and nobody's paying to have them restored and released on Blu-ray or something. That was the case with Repeat Performance. That wasn't a film that was lost. We knew who owned it and all that, but it was our responsibility to restore it and work out a rights agreement with the people who actually owned the film. So as I have said before, the film that is truly lost is one that we just don't know about yet, and things like El Vampiro Negro and The Beast Must Die, those two Argentine films that we restored and put out with our friends at Flicker Alley. Those were films that were completely unknown to me. So when you say, what's the holy grail that you're looking for, um, in some cases, I'm kind of tired of talking about Hollywood films that are not around, because they're around, but it's just they're owned by a studio that doesn't care about putting them out. And there are many reasons for that. But so my focus, it has shifted towards movies that I just don't know about yet. But in some cases, there won't be materials to work with, and it'll be the same story. We have to do real detective work. In other situations, it may just be that it's there, nobody knows about it, and they're waiting for somebody like the Film Noir Foundation or the Film Foundation or some other preservation group to come along and save it. Okay, so this is James in Minneapolis, is wondering. This dovetails. I see how you set these up, in. This
Yes.
dovetails with the last question, because James in Minneapolis has been wondering about the neglect of Christmas holiday. James says to his mind, it's one of Robert Siodmak's best movies, but he has rarely seen it discussed and it doesn't seem to be available anywhere. Why is that? I think I probably mentioned this on other shows that, you know, the underlying literary rights appear to have lapsed on that film. Universal owned the rights to turn that Somerset Maugham story into a film, and then those rights will lapse after a certain point. And if they are not renewed by the studio that made the film, then they won't do anything with the movie. So the dilemma in a situation like this is that, right or wrong, knowledgeable about it or not, the studio will just decide, well, that's hands off that one because we don't want to get sued by the Somerset Maugham estate or the heirs of Somerset Maugham or something like that. And so they just don't do anything with the film. And Universal owns Christmas Holiday. It was made by Siodmak when he was under contract at Universal in 1945. And it's a great film. I've shown it before. It was not a missing film, 5 years ago, but now it is, because Universal has the prints, Universal has the negative, but Universal has no desire to do anything with it because of the lapsing of those underlying literary rights. So this is a job of work, as John Ford would say, to sort all this out and convince them that there's value in that film and putting it back out. We'll see. I mean, but that's exactly what I was saying before. Christmas Holiday is not lost; it's just kind of held hostage.
Yeah.
So we'll see what can be done. Not always easy.
And this is from Ryan from Valley Village, California. Can you talk about how the studio system worked when artists, actors, directors, writers were under contract? What was the process in assigning creatives to certain projects? In other words, who decided which actors or directors were assigned to a film? You hear stories about how certain actors would turn down a movie, but how that was allowed if they were under contract to a studio. Could an actor turn down a project but still get paid their weekly fee because they were under contract?
Interesting question. So I wonder how old Ryan is, from Valley Village, California, because I don't think that younger people have any idea about how they hear about the studio system, but I don't know if they have any idea how it actually worked. So, I mean, the studios, right? 8 major studios in Hollywood. Well, 5 major studios, 3 minor, what were considered to be the minor studios. They all had a head of the studio. Then there was a chief of production, and then under them were producers, studio producers, who would organize the projects and decide who was going to direct it, who was going to be assigned to write it, who was going to play in it. The directors, of course, had a big say in the casting and all of that. But that was pretty much how it got done. And there was a real hierarchy in all of the studios. There would be the A-list directors who could have a lot of say in what they were going to make. We'll just take Warner Brothers, for example, right? So Jack Warner was the head of everything. Then he had, like Hal Wallace was the head of production underneath him during the 1930s. And then there were lots of other producers. Brian Foy at one point was the head of the B division at Warner Brothers. And then Hal Wallace would choose who was right for a certain kind of material. If they bought a property and they said, oh, this will be great for Raoul Walsh, this will be great, for whoever, it would change every 10 years. Well, Michael Curtiz, for example, was like the A-list director at Warner Brothers. So he was generally, when they had a project that they were putting all the chips on, Curtiz was probably the first guy at the studio who got right of refusal on the project, right? And then and it's interesting because actors would be put on suspension if they refused an assignment, right? And that was fairly common. I mean, Olivia de Havilland would be suspended, Betty Davis would be suspended, Ann Sheridan would get suspended, Ida Lupino was suspended, because they would say, you're going to make this movie, and they'd say, no, I'm not. I don't want to do that again. You're trying to shove me into a certain type of film, when actors wanted to have more range, play different characters. So they would be suspended without pay. Right. I mean, Ann Sheridan was like the suspension queen at Warner Brothers, because she would just turn down all kinds of stuff because she really wanted to act, and they just wanted her to be like the good-looking woman in the film, right?
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the way the whole thing was structured at that time. And then the other thing that actors hated about the way the studio system worked was that if another studio wanted one of those actors, right? Like for example, when Bogart, who was under contract to Warner Brothers, made Dead Reckoning for Columbia, they would charge Warner Brothers, Warner Brothers would charge Columbia much more than Bogart's going rate to get him. And then they would keep anything over Bogart's weekly salary went to the studio. And the actor, even though they were so popular that other studios were willing to pay for them, it was the studio that made the money. I mean, that was very, very common. And sometimes, if you made $2,000 a week, the studio would tell a rival, the price of this guy is $5,000 a week. And then they'd keep the $3,000. They'd pay the actor the two, but they'd keep the three. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So should we talk a little bit about why Betty Davis was called the fifth Warner brother?
Go, Ann, go.
So it's kind of interesting because as soon as I saw this question, I immediately thought of Betty Davis, because she actually sued Warner's over this issue, not the loadout issue, but the issue of being forced to play whatever they assigned her to, and it did not go in her favor. Basically, the contract was upheld that they could, suspend her whatever she wanted. And I believe she was the one that at one point she tried to make a film with another studio, and also I think Warner's actually sued her that time over that, because she was under contract, and once you're under contract, studios really owned you, and they could also dictate things about your personal life as well, not just your working life.
Right. And Betty Davis and Humphrey Bogart were the two biggest stars in the 40s, Warner Brothers, and they hated it. And they both hated Jack Warner completely. And Warner Brothers was kind of legendary for, Olivia de Havilland sued, Joan Leslie sued to get out of her contract at a certain point. They called it indentured servitude to the studios. But this is another reason why I am so have such respect for Barbara Stanwyck, because she never signed with one studio.
Yep.
She was just like, I know I'm the best actress in town. You can pay me the going rate, and I will work for anybody.
Yeah.
And and she ended up making movies at every studio for all the best producers. And she never went through that nonsense that Betty Davis went through or de Havilland went through. It was, she was pretty savvy.
Yeah, and it's just pointing out again how remarkable that was, because that just wasn't how the system worked. And and you didn't really see that happening with other actors, even really big actors, until after the studio started to get dismantled and the actors were able to, like James Cagney and Bogart, form their own production companies, which we're really used to now, but that simply didn't happen under the
well, there's another good one. See, I don't know why I'm stuck on Warner Brothers. It must be because they bumped me off TCM for a month with their
your resentment showing up.
Well, because John Garfield, same thing. He was a Warner Brothers actor, and then he didn't like the way they used him, and so he started his own production company, Enterprise Pictures, which failed dismally, and partly because the powers that be in Hollywood were completely unsupportive of him. And also there is a thing now that I mean, I'm making the producers and the studio executives look pretty bad here, but in Garfield's case, right, he started his own studio and it failed dismally because artists aren't necessarily the people who should be running a studio.
Yeah.
They just they don't concern themselves with the longevity of the operation. It's like this is going to be perfect because they're often creating things in reaction to the style of production that they didn't like. So they go the other way, and then all of a sudden, we got no more money left.
Yeah, which I think is another reason why Ida Lupino was so remarkable because, she and her, I guess they were married at the time, created filmmakers, which was their own production company. And I think also because they also went but that was interesting too. Sorry. The films were fairly low budgeted, but at the same time, they also were doing kind of social issue films that you really weren't seeing being made anywhere else too.
Mm-hmm.
Like The Bigamist and Outrage and things like that.
Absolutely. And all of this started to change like right at the dawn of the 1950s is when the studio system started to fall apart in the way films were made. And independent filmmaking became, the studio became distributors for these films, but the films were by and large financed outside the studio. And today, I would say that the model for how you do this is the Coen brothers are the best example of how you work steadily, you make films constantly, you attract the best talent uh, because they understand the business side of it as much as they understand the artistic side of it, and they don't spend too much money making their movies, so that virtually all their films turn a profit, even though they're never in the top money makers of the year or anything like that. But they make good, really interesting films that they have total control of. They produce them, they write them, they direct them, they edit them, and they are, because of their integrity as artists and how creative they attract major stars who work for them for a lot less money than their normal fees. I mean, when Brad Pitt makes a movie for the Coen brothers, he is not making what he would make, doing, one of these colossal studio Bullet Train or something like that. So their model is like perfection for the way the business changed over the years. Oh,
okay.
Me now. Okay. This is John in Tampa, Florida. He says, you did it again, Ann. The very first noir that really had an impact on me was the first Friday during the TCM Summer of Darkness. I watched Nora Prentiss as I started live tweeting. Okay. I'm gonna let you go on that one, John, but I'm gonna suggest that the first time you're watching a movie, try to not tweet. The first time you're watching a movie, okay. With it, he was tweeting with a few people who were watching, and we were all impacted by the twists and turns in that fabulous noir. Yet on lists and reading people's noir posts, I rarely see anyone who comments on this film. I'd like to know both your takes on Nora Prentiss. And what do you think?
I think it's a great film. I was so surprised the first time I watched it because I actually really like Kent Smith, and it was such a different role for him playing this guy who becomes very obsessed with the title character and goes to great lengths. I don't want to give too much away to pursue a relationship with her. And then I also really liked Anne Sheridan's character in it, Nora Prentiss, because she's a very sympathetic character and not a femme fatale. She was sort of getting swept up in this guy's obsession with her. It's a good movie.
It really is a terrific film, and I completely agree with what John is saying. I don't know why it's not. Well, I do know why, because there has always been. This is not the first time I'm saying this. There has always been a tendency for people to discount female protagonists in noir and to say, well, that's that's a melodrama or something. That's a romantic novel. That's not film noir. But the weird part is all you have to do is consider Nora Prentiss, even though that's the name of the movie. Kent Smith's character is really the protagonist of the film. I mean, it's a story about how insane he goes in his obsession for this woman, and she's the innocent victim. It's almost like a Me Too story from the mid 40s, like, why won't this guy leave me alone? And its noir credentials are impeccable in my estimation. I mean, a doctor who is obsessed with a woman and then tries to create a new life for himself so he can disappear from his family and be with her. So he uses a corpse he pretends that it's him so that he's dead. And then he tracks her down and everything. And then eventually he gets accused of the murder of himself. He gets accused of murdering himself. I mean, what a great plot that is. And it's photographed by James Wong Howe. So it's like, and it's set in San Francisco. The first half is set in San Francisco. And like, what's not to like? And Ann Sheridan, who is she's fantastic in the film.
Yeah, and she gives a really great performance. And I think too, sometimes people don't want to consider stuff film noir unless it has a femme fatale, and that's just not really true. I mean, and I always find these characters really interesting to me, where these women are getting caught up in situations that are really detrimental, and that the problem isn't that they're these sirens, but these guys are completely crazy. And like in this film, he's just so obsessed with her. It's it's like she did not bring the situation onto herself at all.
Exactly.
Which is much more reflective of how life really is.
Which, and you just said it. I mean, that is the definition of the femme fatale character. Does the woman behave in a way that causes the tragedies to happen, or is she actually just the victim of the male obsession, right? So it's funny how so many famous noir films, especially ones that have women's names in the title, like Laura, Gilda, Mildred Pierce, Nora Prentiss, the woman is not a femme fatale. I mean, Gilda is not really a femme fatale. She just can't help the fact that she drives men nuts because she's so fabulous. She's so beautiful and so sexy that they lose their minds. And yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, Ava Gardner and the Killers, that's a femme fatale.
Yeah.
Rita Hayworth and the Lady from Shanghai, that's a femme fatale, right? They willfully and knowingly pull people into this spiral of doom that isn't going to end well because they want to get something out of it. Nora Prentiss is just like, wow, this guy's really nice. He's treating me really great. He's a good Joe. I like him. And then too bad. He's totally obsessed with you and you can't get away from him, So all right, John, I hope you understand our mutual love for Nora Prentiss.
And this is from Reverend Billy. Have you read the new Lawrence Tierney bio?
I will admit I have not read it cover to cover, but I have gone through and kind of perused the book. Obviously, this is by Bert Kearns, who wrote this book. I think it came out maybe a year or so ago.
Yeah.
And of course, I got it and immediately looked to see if I was in it because of the infamous night that I spent at the Egyptian Theater with good old Larry back in 1999. And yes, indeed, that story is like one of the, dare I say, climactic stories in the bio. It's good. The parts I've read are good, and I will certainly read the whole thing cover to cover. I mean, it's very interesting that for a long time, way back then, after that story had happened, that night had happened, and I wrote the story about it, which is on my website because at a certain point I vowed to never tell that story again because as I like to say, I dined out on that story for years and years because
No.
tell the Lawrence Tierney story. Um, and then people approached me and said, "Why don't you write a biography of Lawrence Tierney?" I had a lot of that. Alan Rhodey also had people approach him and say, "Why don't you write a bio of Lawrence Tierney?" And Bert Kearns finally got around to doing it, but I didn't see a character arc there.
Uh-huh.
Lawrence Tierney was a badass when he was a teenager, and he remained the same badass character for his entire life. So it's an amazing survival story that the guy lasted as long as he did. But I always felt like, as a writer, I wrote Tab Hunter's biography, and it was like, well, this is really interesting because here's a guy who's America's heartthrob who's hiding the fact that he's gay, and he went through so many progressions in his career. And then you had Act 3 was nobody even knows who I am. And then John Waters calls him and says, "Will you make this movie with Divine?" And it's like, now there's an Act 3, that
Yeah.
totally revived Tab's life and career and everything. So there was no such thing with Lawrence Tierney. It was just like, then this other guy hired him and found out what an impossible idiot he was and what an
Mm-hmm.
asshole. And now he gets into a fist fight with Quentin Tarantino on the first. Gotta say, Tarantino, God love him, talk about baptism by fire. Like his first movie, he hires Lawrence Tierney, and like the first day on the set, Tierney's like, "I'm not gonna read this bullshit," and they get into a fight, and it's like, I think it was all easy for Quentin after that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's it.
All right.
I okay. Paul from Fargo Land. Uh, he says, while The Uninvited of 1944 stands the test of time as a classic ghost story, Paramount's 1945 follow up, The Unseen, is largely forgotten. Deservedly so, in Paul's opinion. Given the film's lack of wit among its other deficiencies, I was surprised to see Raymond Chandler's name on the credits. And Paul wants to call upon my Chandler expertise to explain his involvement in this lackluster movie. Well, that's pretty simple, Paul. They paid him. They paid him to write that screenplay because Chandler was relatively new to Hollywood at that point, right? I mean, the Joe Sistrom hired him. It was Joe Sistrom at Paramount who suggested Chandler to Billy Wilder when Wilder read Double Indemnity and said, "The story's good, but the dialogue is lousy."
Yeah.
And that's when Sistrom said, "Well, there's this guy, Raymond Chandler. He writes great dialogue. Maybe you guys can work together." And then Paramount figured, maybe we can put this guy under contract and get some other work out of him. And they assigned him The Unseen, and it was just not Chandler's style at all. But I think he took it because he was trying to figure out how to write a screenplay. I
Yeah.
mean, he had the greatest screenwriter in Hollywood. I mean, it's either Billy Wilder. At that point, it was Billy Wilder or Ben Hecht or Preston Sturges were like the
Yeah.
greatest writers in Hollywood. And he wanted to write one without the crutch of Billy Wilder
Yeah.
so that he could learn how to do it. And you know what? I don't think he did.
Yeah.
I mean, Chandler was not a good screenwriter.
Yeah.
He never really understood movies.
Mm-hmm.
And although his prose style is second to none, as a screenwriter, not good. So
Yeah.
that's the explanation, Paul, as to what happened there. And I'm going to stop there because I'm cheating and looking ahead, and I'm seeing that you're doing the Ann Hockens domino principle with these questions. It's one segues right into the other. So take us away.
This is from Robert. Does any studio own the right to Chandler's The Lady in the Lake? If not, I'm ready to author the screenplay. Even standing on my head, I can do a better job than Robert Montgomery's subjective camera stinker from the 40s.
You're a confident man, Robert. Well, I'm not sure. I don't know if MGM still owns the film rights, but I know that the literary rights to The Lady in the Lake belong to the Helga Green estate. Helga Green was Chandler's British agent, and there was a lot of finagling, shall we say, to get for her to get the rights to Chandler's literary output. And Helga Green eventually got them, and the Helga Green estate holds them to this day. It's very, like I was saying before about Chandler not being a particularly good screenwriter. If I was home now and not in this hotel room, I could show you Chandler's original script for The Lady in the Lake, which I actually have a copy of. It was never published or anything, but I actually have a mimeographed copy. I won't say how I got that, but and it's not good. It's really interesting to read it and see how Chandler was such a contrarian. He consciously avoided advancing the plot in favor of Marlowe sitting around bantering with receptionists and secretaries, and everything that Chandler was into was the stuff starting the scene and the funny stuff ending the scene and all the banter and everything. But man, that screenplay is like this thick. It just goes on forever. And it's like, no, this isn't going to work. They're never going to shoot this. And whether he was just doing that because he's a contrarian, or he was drinking and he liked to write the dialogue, that, I mean, that movie is one scene of Chandler, like I said, bantering with waitresses, secretaries, the Adrian Fromset, the Audrey Totter character in the movie. So they actually hired other writers to come in and kick it around. Steve Fisher, especially, who didn't waste a lot of time. And I'm not saying that what Chandler wrote was a waste, but it's just like, when you know how they made movies in 1947, it's like, well, they're not shooting this, because every screenwriter will tell you that the way you write a script is you get into the scene and out of the scene as fast as possible, and you don't write what they call the handles. The handles are like, walks into the room. Hello, how are you? What kind of day did you have today? All this not just cut right into the meat of the scene, right? And in that Lady in the Lake script, Chandler was writing, every scene had these long handles, and then somewhere in there hidden was the plot point that was advancing the story, but it was buried in all of this verbiage that was just like what the detective does when he's not letting on that he's a detective or something, So anyway, it's pretty funny to read.
I think there's just something about Chandler that so far I've never really loved any of the adaptations of his work. Like, they just don't seem to really like work as films. And I think it'd be interesting to have something of his adapted more into like long form television. You know what I mean? Like several episodes instead of trying to do it as a film, because I don't know, his plotting's like really complicated. So a lot of times when they're trying to condense it down, like things just don't like necessarily make sense. And also I find his stories to me are very like character driven in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so it'd be interesting, since we're doing all these sort of adaptations of mysteries now into these like kind of, on Netflix or whatever, it'd be kind of cool to see something of his adapted that way.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe they could do The Long Goodbye. I don't know who'd play Marlowe, but as a mini series, as opposed to trying to pack all that into one film. But the one that actually, I mean, Chinatown is the movie that feels the most like Raymond Chandler, but it's not a Raymond Chandler story, right? And The Big Sleep certainly captures the momentum. Like, Chandler's plots don't really hold together, but there's great forward momentum, and it's exciting to read because it's like, what's going to happen next? what's going to happen next. And the Big Sleep definitely captures that, and Murder My Sweet to some extent, I think
Yeah,
is,
I like that one.
definitely, I'm never sold on Dick Powell as Philip Marlowe, but if you just ignore that and it's just a detective story, it's really good. It's really
Well, plus Claire Trevor is really great in that.
of course, indeed. So, yeah. So there's it's an interesting thought about, and we already talked about the movie, the new Marlowe movie that was less said the better. Okay. I'm going now.
Yep.
Okay, this is an interesting question. Again, the domino principle right here. Kevin from Longmont, Colorado, notes that Raymond Chandler is well represented in the movie, sometimes as an original screenwriter and often stuff based on his novels. Yet there are even more stories out there. I've been reading the short stories and novellas in The Simple Art of Murder, collection of previously published stories introduced by a version of his essay and of the essay, The Simple Art of Murder, predating The Big Sleep. He notes at this point he hadn't read them all, but they don't involve Philip Marlowe. That's correct. His Shamus had a different name when he was writing for the pulps. Some of these would be perfect for the typical 60-minute B quickie, which unfortunately doesn't seem to be made much anymore, or even for television. And Kevin is saying he did some searches to see if any might be hidden in the genre, but no success. Did I miss any? And then he names these stories, and for Chandler aficionados, they know these stories very well. Spanish Blood and Pearls Are a Nuisance, Pick Up on Noon Street, which was a title of another collection where they rearranged the stories, Anyway, and there's several more. So what I will say, and one of them is a story called I'll Be Waiting.
Yeah.
And Kevin, I'm going to suggest that you search out an old Showtime series from 1993 called Fallen Angels, which was the creation of a guy named William Horberg, was the executive producer. And this was a very, very earnest attempt to adapt all of your favorite noir and detective fiction writers in a series just like that. It was like B movies come back, right? And I'll Be Waiting was one of the adaptations, was Chandler's I'll Be Waiting, and Red Wind, another short story, was also one of those, in which, very interestingly, Philip Marlowe was played by Danny Glover, which I thought was kind of inspired and unusual casting. But these things were really interesting because there were also stories from David Goodis, Cornell Woolrich. There was a Dashiell Hammett story, William Lindsay Galt story I know was adapted, and cool people directed them. I mean, I think, unless I'm mistaken, I think Tom Hanks directed the Chandler one. And I know Tom Cruise directed one of those. And Steven Soderbergh did the David Goodis adaptation, the professional. And it's really interesting stuff. And the actors were great. Gary Oldman was in one of them. And so it's and it came out in 1993, and it was nominated for some Emmy awards and stuff. And then it took a year off and then came back, and there was another season of shows in 1995. We did a thing on it in the magazine. Danilo Castro wrote a feature several years ago in the North City magazine about this show, and interviewed I think William Horberg and Howard Rodman Jr., who wrote a number of these scripts. I think Howard wrote that Goodis adaptation that they did. So look around for that. Look around for that, Kevin. You'll be impressed.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I know Pearls is Are a Nuisance was adapted to a radio show at one point. And that's something else too. If people want to kind of discover like short stories being adapted into media, like the radio show Suspense did a ton of pulp stories, a lot of Colonel Woolrich. Like a lot of his stuff was adapted, but other writers too. So that's a really kind of cool resource if you want to kind of see those stories. I guess dramatized is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also cool, and you're far more the expert on the radio stuff than I am, but it's also very cool when you think, oh, did these people ever make a movie together or something? And then you see that they did a radio show together. It's like I forget which one it was, but I was looking at something the other day. I think it was a film that was shown here in Palm Springs. And I was just looking up something on it, and I realized that Barbara Stanwyck and William Holden did the radio version of the story. And I thought, wow, how awesome would that be? I'd love to hear that. So I'm sorry, I can't remember what the movie was right now.
Yeah, and there was a couple of, like, there was Lux Radio Theater did primarily, film adaptations. And sometimes it's fun too, because you get some what if casting where maybe the lead from the movie does it, but then other people play the supporting roles. And that can be really interesting too, because it kind of is like playing that game of, oh, this person wasn't in it, or I would have liked to seen someone else in this role. You can kind of do that. Plus, it's really fun because there was one, it was Academy Award theater where their stories were only 25 minutes long, but they were doing Academy nominated or Academy Award winning films. And listening to the Maltese Falcon in 25 minutes was just so much fun, because that's such a complicated story. And they're like, seriously gonna sing it down.
Do you have any knowledge of what actors were paid for those shows? I'd be so curious to know, like, because I'm wondering if they liked doing it, if it was a great gig because it wasn't the rigors of making a movie, because you just have to stand in front of a microphone and act and get paid, or if they thought like, oh, now I got to do this too. I'd be very curious to know what the actors' attitudes were towards doing that stuff and how much they got paid. I would be fascinated to know that.
Yeah, I have no idea on the pay, but I remember that Jimmy Stewart always said that the radio show he did, which was a Western, that was his favorite project. He loved doing radio. So because yeah, it's a different medium, but people seem to really enjoy it. Like, I'm always surprised by the people that, especially like the Jack Benny program. It's like, well, Jack was such a great guy, I think was part of it. But like, one time Jack was sick for like 6 weeks. So Orson Welles took over the show, and then it's a show about a show. People might not realize that. Yes, other people thought of that before. And that was Jack's thing. And so he was basically also sort of taking over the production of the show. So there's a lot of jokes about like what a control freak he is and stuff like that. And I don't think Wells was getting paid that much for it, but he really liked doing the Jack Benny show. I mean, Benny had huge stars.
It's interesting that radio died out and now it's kind of back, but it's just called podcasting, but yet it's all just people talking and not acting. That's what's kind of interesting. I don't know. I mean, I know our friend Amy Pavey does a show, like an old time radio show called 12 Chimes It's Midnight, where it's like horror scripts acted out, which is fabulous, but I don't think there's much of that anymore. But I think it would be just, actors must love that, because to actually be able to act just with your voice in a controlled environment is I have a little bit of experience with that, doing an audiobook or two, and it's like, this is it's not easy. It is a real challenge, but it's also not super strenuous. You sit in a nice comfortable studio and you do the whole thing, and
and a lot of times too, you get to play roles that you would never get to play, like James, like James Mason is a good example of being able to do comedy, which really wasn't his thing, or like suspense. Like every actor they want in suspense. I mean, those were pretty much, murder stories. And so you have like Betty Grable, and it's like, well, did she poison her mother or not? And that was never something Betty Grable they would have been put in as a film.
Right.
So I think there's that aspect of it too, is just to be able to do stuff against type that you can't really do. That no one's gonna in a studio film is gonna put you in that type of a role.
It's funny now that I've I realized that I just did this. Uh, I actually, and I can't talk about it. I am forbidden from discussing this, but there's a podcast, a series that asked me to participate as an actor portraying a famous film director, and I've done it already. But it won't be out until the fall, and I'm not allowed to talk about it beforehand. And they're deciding whether or not they're going to um, announce that it's me playing the part or just let it go and see if anybody notices, because
Yeah.
this, this is not a, because they didn't have they had transcripts, so everything I say is actually the words that this filmmaker said,
Yeah.
but they never had an audio recording of him saying it was just an interviewer talking to him and printing his responses. So I got to actually say it,
Yeah.
play the part. So it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to that when it finally, you'll hear about it when it comes out. So
All right. And this one is from Gary from Brooklyn. I'm a huge fan of the writer David Goodis. For me, he's the epitome of a noir author, able to create a tense and exciting noir world in his stories. Eddie, you published a book on David Goodis, A Life in Black and White by Philip Garnier. That being out of print for a while and impossible to find anywhere, are there any plans to bring this book back into print? Also, I'd love to hear what your favorite David Goodis story is and movie. Mine are a story Black Pudding, and the movies are Don't Shoot the Piano Player and The Burglar. Also, I've purchased all the movies you've put out through Flickr Alley. Thank you. Keep up the great work.
okay, fantastic. Wow, Black Pudding. That's a weird choice for your favorite Goodis story, but that's fabulous. And I believe the title of the Truffaut film is Shoot the Piano Player, not Don't Shoot the Piano Player. It's actually called Shoot the Piano Player, which is based on Down There, the Goodis novel. I would say, I mean, Dark Passage is pretty great. The book Dark Passage is really fun. So I like that. I like Cassidy's Girl very much of the novels. I like Nightfall very much. And I like Black Friday is a good one. Uh, of the movies, again, I think Nightfall is terrific. And Dark Passage. I love Dark Passage. Um, and The Burglar with your man Dan Duryea. I definitely I like that. And I'm trying to remember. I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the title of it. There's a French film that was done with Aldo Ray uh, that's pretty interesting. It's a heist story. Anyway, I can't remember it, so I'm not gonna say it. But uh, I don't know if we're gonna bring that back into print again, because it would require a pretty significant print run. I'm proud to say we sold every last copy of the Goodis book, uh, and my colleague Philippe Garnier. I'm so happy that I was able to do that for him, because for many, many years, he wrote the book in French originally. And for many years, he resisted having an American publisher do it because he felt that they would screw it up, that they wouldn't do it right. So, it was quite an honor when I said, well, I'll publish this because it really needs to be out there, because um, most of the knowledge that people have about David Goodis came from that book.
Yeah.
And so it was sort of only people who read French, they all had a leg up on their Goodis knowledge. And then I'll just say this outright. Philippe never would. But the great writer James Salas, who wrote Drive and many other wonderful books, uh, he did a book where he wrote a long extended profile of David Goodis. It was basically rewriting Philippe's work. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it was plagiarism or anything, but everything that he wrote came from Philippe's book. And so Philippe was like, finally, it's like, Jesus, I wish somebody would just publish this thing, so they know I did the work before that.
Yeah.
And so I did. Um, anyway, but I doubt we'll do it again. Uh, that's all. I was going somewhere with that, and then I just forgot my train of thought. So I'll just leave it at that.
We'll blame that on the heat. It's too hot down there to think.
Thank you. It's a little too hot down here, but anyway, Dave, how are you, Dave in Quincy, Florida? Um, Dave says, as a Florida historian and native, he's curious if there's any Florida-based noir. Plenty of neo-noirs, of course, from John D. MacDonald to Elmore Leonard, with Carl Hiaasen, I believe, thrown in there as well. So is there any classic? Well, he's naming John MacDonald, of course. All those Travis McGee books are just fantastic. The Busted Flush. Well, Dead Reckoning, the Bogart film that we talked about earlier in this show. Dead Reckoning is set in Florida. I guess it's supposed to be, I'm not sure where, St. Petersburg or something like that. I'm not entirely sure. Of course, Key Largo is set in Florida. There's a 50s movie called The Miami Story that isn't very good, but it is set in Florida. And then a neo-noir that is right in the middle that people don't remember so much is Tony Rome, when Frank Sinatra decided he wanted to be Humphrey Bogart. And he made a couple of those, right? Tony Rome and Lady in Cement. And Tony Rome is all set in Florida. Body Heat, of course, it's funny. I don't even really think of Body Heat as a neo-noir anymore, although it feels now when you watch it, it feels a lot closer to the original movies than it does new movies. Wild Things with Kevin Bacon and Matt Dillon and Denise Richards and Naomi Campbell.
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. How could I forget?
Yeah.
Miami Blues, based on the Charles Willeford novel, with the great Fred Ward, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Alec Baldwin, a great crazy
He's
psycho.
Incredible in that.
Volker Schlongdorff made a film called Palmetto with Elizabeth Shue and Gina Gershon. I think Woody Harrelson is in that as well. That's set in Florida. That's a weird one because the casting is reversed.
Yeah.
Because normally if you had Gina Gershon and Elizabeth Shue in a movie, Elizabeth Shue would be the good girl and Gina Gershon would be the femme fatale, and they reverse it in Palmetto, which is kind of intriguing. Anyway, those are ones that I can think of off the top of my head. You got any others that you throw in the mix? Or
Miami Blues was the one that immediately popped to mind because that's just a great film. I need to watch that again.
Alec Baldwin has that weird 80s bushy.
Yeah.
It's like a crew cut, but it's really bushy.
It's
the guy uses no conditioner. He uses no conditioner.
There you go. No, it's a great performance of his. I mean, it's kind of easy to forget what a good actor Alec Baldwin is, but he's such a great actor.
Absolutely. I watched again the other night because I can never see it enough. I watched Glengarry Glen Ross, and that's so fascinating because it's one of the rare occasions, right, where David Mamet not only wrote the play, he wrote the script for the movie, but he changed it because he wrote that character that Alec Baldwin plays in the script, but it's not in the stage play.
Yeah.
And I mean, that made him. That was like he got nominated for a Best Supporting Actor Oscar, and it's one scene. It's that one scene where he comes in and does the sales meeting, and First prize is a Cadillac. Second prize is a set of steak knives.
Yeah.
Losers. Fantastic.
Uh,
Okay.
this is from Brian. Wouldn't Bound be a neo-noir with two femme fatales?
We must have spoken before about, there was a question, is there any movie with two femme fatales?
Yes.
I think we
And
had
this
that
is
one
Brian's
previously.
response, I think, maybe, possibly. I don't
Well,
know.
I'm going to say, Brian, no, because they don't betray each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, maybe they look like femme fatales, but it seems to me they're actually in love.
Well, that, and also they're the protagonist.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they're will they get away with this against Joey Pants and the whole
Yeah.
thing? And if one of them then betrayed the other one at the end, like she was stringing her along
Yeah.
all that time, then she would have been a femme fatale. But that doesn't happen. I mean, that's kind of why that movie is a little bit subversive, and there's a lot of reasons why that movie is subversive. But that's one that gets overlooked, perhaps, is that
Mm-hmm.
they don't betray each other.
Yeah.
So sorry if I spoiled it for people who haven't seen Bound yet, but there you go. So I get where Brian is coming from, but I'm gonna say that it's almost uh, necessary for a femme fatale to fully qualify. She has to be deceitful and cause the downfall of the person that is enthralled to them.
Yeah.
And that just doesn't happen in that movie. Okay, Kathleen from Chicago. What are some good neo noirs featuring female protagonists? Well, there's this one called Bound.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. Okay, and you want to try to do this? Let's do that. Let's see if we can bounce back and forth, thinking of a film with a female, a neo noir
Noir
with a female
where the female's actually
protagonist,
the
where the
protagonist.
female. Well, that's also an interesting uh, point that I can tell in your voice. That's the point
Yeah.
you're bringing up. Is like the I guess the definition of a protagonist is that the story is about them,
Yeah.
right? As opposed to, and then the antagonist is the obstacle to the protagonists getting what they want. Uh, but sometimes I think if the character is just good enough and big enough and moves the story forward, uh, there can be like mutual protagonists. So I'm saying all this because the one I'm thinking of is The Last Seduction with Linda Fiorentino, right? She is the antagonist in the movie.
Yes. Yeah.
But the movie is really about
her. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, because Bill Pullman is supposedly the protagonist of the movie, but he's the weakest character in the film.
Yeah.
And it's all about her.
Yeah.
Which is totally noir. Like the villain carries the story, because she is the bad one. And of course, that movie is famous for being, well, it's not the first one, because I guess Body Heat was the first movie in which the femme fatale gets away with it.
Yeah.
And sorry again, boy, spoilers galore in this episode.
Yeah.
But the
These
Last
films
Seduction,
are like over 30 years old, so I kind of feel like
you should have seen him by now.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, like, Kathleen, I don't know if she's asking about uh contemporary films, because who knows how, neo-noir, people refer to stuff from the 60s as neo-noir and stuff from today as neo-noir, meaning that the neo-noir era is now like 5 times as long as the original film noir era, right? So it's almost like you got to start calling it something else, you know. Anyway, I also kind of feel the same way about the grifters. That some people might think that Roy, played by John Cusack, is the protagonist, but I happen to think that it's his mother, played by Angelica Houston, who's actually the protagonist of the film. Although in some ways, the way Stephen Frears made that movie, he's basically telling the audience there are three protagonists.
Yeah, that's
because,
how I view that film. It's all three of them. Yeah.
yeah, because he does that opening scene where he does the split screens where the scene follows each of them, and then you see the three of them because they are the grifters.
Yeah.
And anyway, any others that you can think of?
I was just gonna say, I feel like this is kind of more prevalent on TV series now, or these limited series, because you have like Kate Winslet's character. Oh God, what's it called?
Mayor of Easttown.
Mayor of Easttown. Like, I mean, she's like a Nora protagonist, basically, in that. I would also say Kim Wexler from Breaking Bad, not Breaking Bad, Better Call
From
Saul.
Better Call Saul, yeah.
I mean, she's definitely, I mean, as much that story winds up being as much about her as it is about Jimmy. So yeah,
That's very true.
Yeah, so I think that's kind of like, I think women tend to get those roles now on these kind of series as opposed to on the big screen. It's really hard to think of a lot
I think we're going to see more of them. It just popped into my mind because a couple, Nicole Kidman has done it twice, as far as I can tell. She did To Die For, which is it's a noir film,
Yeah.
And she did Destroyer, which I think is really a completely overlooked movie. I mean, that have you seen it? Did you see Destroyer?
No, I need to see it. Yeah.
I really like that film. I saw it at the Telluride Film Festival, and she was there and talked about it with Carol Kusama, the director of the film. Her husband co-wrote the screenplay, but it was a very smart movie and very much a noir in that it has the flashback structure of the classic noir, and she plays a cop who has a very tragic thing happens in the line of duty that haunts her and kind of turns her into a meth addict. And I just thought that movie was excellent. And Nicole Kidman, probably the best performance I've ever seen her give. And the fact that, one of those things, I shouldn't even say the word, that was Oscar, but the fact that she was just totally overlooked for that just goes to show you that it has so little to do with what's actually on the screen. It just has to do with how much money the film makes. And if the film doesn't break out, they're like, well, we're not going to bother nominating that. But she's been nominated for other things, and this is by far the most challenging and difficult performance she's had to give in a movie, and it was she was terrific in that.
Yeah, and I think sometimes too, genre things, it's harder to get nominated, because I mean, best performance I saw last year was Mia Goth and Pearl. That was to me an Oscar-worthy performance, but it was a horror film, so it's not going to happen. I mean,
exactly.
The only horror
which is so interesting, Anne, because I've always said this, like, actors earn their money by making the audience believe stuff that can be preposterous. If you can make the audience believe that this person is actually going through this, when the writers are trying, reaching, this is like why I love Stanwyck and No Man of Her Own. It's like absolutely absurd premise. Cornell Woolridge, she sells it completely. She's great in that. And I just think that genre pictures, they reach further. They try to do more outrageous things, and you have to suspend your disbelief. And so, I couldn't agree with you more. What Mia Goth is doing these days, she is a godsend. I mean, didn't she write that as well? I think she wrote that picture.
She wrote that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but that's a gift to writers and directors when actors are able to sell a character that is a lesser actor, you just say, "Oh, I don't believe this at all," you know. And anyway,
Yeah.
A couple of other ones pop into my mind. Side Effects, the Steven Soderbergh film. Rooney Mara and Catherine Zeta-Jones are really good in that, and Rooney Mara is the protagonist of the film. And then Soderbergh also did this movie recently, Kimmy.
Yeah.
That was it's like a computer digital world version of Rear Window, or more like Blowout, the Brian De Palma movie, because it has to do with sound and stuff like that. There was also I'm Your Woman, was a recent one that I think that was a streaming show, but it was a standalone thing about a mob wife who has to go into hiding because her husband is there's a contract out on him. That was pretty good too. So there's a lot of these, and you're right. I think you're going to see more of them, obviously, streaming series and movies than you're going to see in the movie theaters these days.
Yeah, and I just want to say also, Small's Sense of Snow is another one. And of course, if people aren't familiar with the Danish series, The Killing, which follows a female detective. And then also, it's a really good movie called Prevengeance, because it's a woman who's pregnant, and I mean, like, heavily pregnant, and is getting vengeance on the people that person she holds responsible for her husband's death. And it's just sort of following her around as she's trying to do that. And that is a great film. It's up on Shudder, but it's really like a noir. It's not a horror film. It's actually a noir, and it's really good. But it's also just so interesting. It was directed by and written by a woman. To see a pregnant woman in that type of role, because we really don't see that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Smilla's Sense of Snow. I didn't even know there was a movie.
Oh yeah, it's good.
I've read the book. I read the book when it came out. I remember loving the book.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh my God, they made that into a movie. I got to find this.
Oh God, I saw it in the theaters. It was incredible because it was shot on location, of course, and so it's just
well, most of it takes place on a ship, right? I mean, well, the second half of the story, I think, takes place on a merchant ship or something. If my memory serves me, I don't know. But anyway, I remember, and I can't remember the author's name, but I remember, I think he had like 3 or 4 books that were all really, really good. Very exciting, suspenseful stuff. Yeah. Okay, whose turn is it to read? Is it?
It's me. This is for May. That's such a 40s name.
May.
M-A-E.
M-A-E.
Yeah. I recently saw and loved a Chinese film called Sheep Without a Shepherd, 2019, starring Joan Chen. Is Nora a new tradition to Chinese filmmakers? Do you have others to recommend? And I hope you'll screen this one on TCM.
Well, I wouldn't hold your breath waiting for that. But I am very happy to say I'm not stumped this time, because I actually have seen this movie. Have you seen this?
I have not.
I have seen this film, and it's really good. But I'm going to say this: it's really good up until the very end. Then I didn't completely love the way they handled the ending. I probably didn't have any objection to what happens at the end, but I just thought it was odd. It's also weird because it's a Chinese film, but I think there are things that happen in the movie that they weren't going to set in China. So the film is actually set in Thailand. And my understanding is that it's a remake of a film that was made in India about 7 or 8 years earlier. And the thing that is very cool about the movie is it's about a father who, I shouldn't give too much away. It's about a guy who's movie crazy. And something happens and he has to rescue his family. And he does this just because of his knowledge of movies. Like this is how it always happens in the pictures. And he goes up against, he is the protagonist, and he goes up against the antagonist, who is Joan Chen,
All right.
who plays the chief of police. So Joan, and I gotta say, Joan Chen looks great in a cop uniform.
Yeah.
So, and it's a little preposterous. It's like I was saying about genre pictures. You're always like so much coincidence and so much stuff you have to suspend your disbelief. Like, oh my God, now this is going to happen. And it's one of those kind of stories. And it's very suspenseful. And I like the performances very much. Anyway, I recommend it. And I think you can probably find it streaming, just Sheep Without a Shepherd. And it's a really good film. And I don't, yes, there are a lot of films coming just from Asia in general, whether it's South Korea or China or Taiwan. There's a lot of crime films coming out of Asia now, and I think that's probably you're going to do better looking for noir films there than here right now. So I can't off the top of my head list a whole bunch, but they're out there.
Yeah, and I would
Okay,
definitely recommend the Korean TV series The Glory, which is on Netflix.
Yes, I did start that. I have started it, and as you warned, I made it through the first episode, which is a little rough.
Yeah.
But good. Haven't finished it yet, but I appreciate the recommendation. Okay, now Robert asks a question that has been asked numerous times here on Ask Eddie, but we'll answer it one more time. He asks, are there any straight up comedy film noirs? To quote Joe Pesci, it defeats its own purpose. What? It defeats its own purpose. I know. Robert says, I've seen humorous moments to break the tension, but it seems impossible to make a comedy noir without it being a total spoof. Well, it's obviously going to be a black comedy. And we've talked here, a million times about Unfaithfully Yours, the Preston Sturges movie. And, I would argue that The Big Sleep is kind of a comedy.
Yeah.
And certainly there are noir films that you can get laughs out of where it's intentional. It's so funny. We were showing Alan here at Palm Springs. He found a bunch of trailers for the movies that he's showing here, and the audience, it's interesting. They crack up at the trailers, because of how the movies were sold. Like he's showing Blood on the Moon because he's written a really cool book, a monograph about that film, and so he's showing the trailer for it, and the audience is just cracking up because this man, riding into the shadows of the canyon, this man, and blah, blah, blah. And it's just so goofy the way they used to sell the films. So there's nothing funny about the movie at all, right? But Unfaithfully Yours is hysterically funny, but also really dark because you realize that Rex Harrison is completely nuts in that film. And it doesn't, anyway, we've discussed that. The humor to be found in someone being homicidal but inept.
Yeah.
It's kind of anyway, but I don't, most of the comedies made in a noir vein are spoofs. Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid and Murder by Death and all this. Murder by Death is an Agatha Christie thing. But I don't know. Is The Long Goodbye, the Elliot Gould Long Goodbye? That's not a comedy, but there's certainly humorous elements in it.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Robert, I couldn't give you a better answer, but humor plays a big part in noir. I truly believe that, and that's one of the things. The wit of that you find in these movies is one of the reasons they're still popular today,
Oh God,
right?
Laura's
But they're
hilarious. Some of the dialogue in
oh
Laura is just so great. And then just Vincent Price's character is just
yeah,
in some
and you
ways
know
hilarious.
the villain in that film, I won't spoil it, but the villain in that film has some of the greatest dialogue ever, and and that's what we like. We like
Yeah.
an erudite villain. All right, so John from Bethesda, Maryland. My wife is familiar with the Naval Hospital there. How many movies do you watch in a given week? And could you break that down into movies watched over a streaming service and movies watched in a movie house? Okay, and it's time to come clean. Let's put our cards on the table. How many movies do you watch in a given week?
Well, I watched a movie on Saturday night with my friend Ted. Even though we've been doing Barry because Barry's back on, and we missed so many nights together that we watched like 4 episodes of Barry like last week, and then 1 episode of Barry. And I'm really happy to say that Ted has gotten to Columbo, and he's like, "So, do you want like a Columbo after this?" I'm like, yeah.
That's a TV series. That's not a movie.
That's what I'm saying, because usually the person I watch a movie with every week is Ted, but we've been kind of getting on a Columbo kick. So I'd say
Okay.
usually like one movie at home, and then just if there's something that I want to see in the theater that plays out of time I can get to it, then I really like to see something in the theater. But it's just a lot of times just with my schedule, it's really difficult. So, and those tend to be like I go to a 5 o'clock show, usually a horror film, frankly, because it's just there's a theater right in between where I live and work. So it's like something I can get to because it's actually I'm just super busy. So it's just really hard for me to um be able to get out to the cinema.
Yeah. Likewise. I mean, I work so much that it's very difficult to find time to just watch a movie, And but I will say that I'm gonna guess I watch between maybe 5 to 7 movies a week, but probably more than half of those are for work purposes.
Right.
Like I'll have to, it's very important if I've seen a movie and like I'm going to write about it or something, I have to watch it again to
Uh-huh.
like make sure I didn't miss anything, or maybe I'll find some. Very often when I watch a film, it's to see if I can connect it to something else that I've seen recently to find like some interesting thing between the films. I mean, I was doing this one recently where this will probably show up in a future issue of the Noir City magazine, but we were discussing like true crime, and we're discussing like what does true crime look like and on the screen, like, and how has that changed over the years. And so I realized that they made such a fuss about The Naked City when it came out in 1948, as the way it looked and the way crime was depicted on the movie screen. And then I realized, yeah, that the other hugely influential New York crime movie is The French Connection,
Uh-huh.
because all crime movies look different after Naked City, then they all look different after The French Connection. So now I'll watch those two movies again to find ideas in there about, oh, that's really interesting. I wonder, who knows, you may spot like Friedkin using the exact same location that Dassin used in The Naked City. He may use it in The French Connection. And so that's kind of the way I watch movies. It's But then I'll watch stuff, new stuff. I mean, a lot of people who watch this steer me to stuff that I want to
Yeah.
watch. And I know it works the other way too, because people always write in, thanks for recommending this or that. But yeah, so I'll say between 5 and 7 movies a week I probably watch, which sounds like a lot, but it really isn't, because in some if it's a movie I've seen before, I'm kind of watching it in a different way. It's
Uh-huh.
and of course older movies are a lot shorter than new movies. So
Uh-huh.
watching 7 new movies in a week is a slog. Watching 7 84-minute movies is a totally different thing.
And I'll be honest, sometimes that's like what prevents me from seeing something in the theater is just that I don't want to sit through a 2.5 hour movie in the theater. I mean, there was a couple things that came out that I wound up I finally just scroll, just watch it streaming because it's like, it's just really hard for me because, I work, obviously a 40-hour week at my day job. And then I get up at 4:30 in the morning so I can work out before work. So, by the time I get home and stuff, it's like, I don't like I don't have time for like a 2.5 hour movie. Like that's something that would have to wait till the weekend when I can actually sit down and watch something that long. I'm just saying people need to make their film shorter and really like this over 2 hour thing needs to stop. I'm against it.
I know. I wonder what that was all about because I really think it was part of the feeling of you got to give people something special to get them to the movie theater. And for some weird reason, they felt like an extra 20 minutes was a bonus. And it's like, not really. I mean, how many times have you seen movies where it's like, this movie's over? And it's like, oh, no, it's not. It's still going on. And it's like, oh, shit, it's 20 minutes longer. I've always said that new movies that made in Hollywood are always 20 minutes too long.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. Maybe something really good like everything, everywhere all at once, which is a great film. I just actually want to buy in a copy because it's cheaper to buy it than actually to pay to watch it digitally. Anyway, so I saw that and I loved it. I thought it was a great film, but I still felt like that didn't need to be over 2 hours. Like they could have trimmed that. They really could have. And it was great and I enjoyed it very much. But this is exactly why I didn't want to see it in the theater it was well over, it was like 220 or something. And when I finally saw it, I thought it was a really good film. And I understand that it was a complicated story, what they were doing, but that still needed 20 minutes taken off.
Exactly. That's why that film I mentioned earlier, the Steven Soderbergh movie, Kimmy, is like 84 minutes long. Oh my God. I mean, it's just remarkable. It's like it's going along and it's getting really suspenseful. And then you're like, oh, they actually ended it right there where a movie from the 50s would have ended in the exact same spot. It
Yeah.
like had a climax and it was the climax. It wasn't the false climax.
Yeah.
It's like, it's over. That's it. Hope you liked it. Now you got time to go eat some dessert or something and talk about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was good. Okay, I think we're done.
Right. I think we're done. So you mentioned North City Magazine. How can people get North City Magazine?
They sign up for the Film Noir Foundation mailing list. That's step one. And then they donate $20 or more to the Film Noir Foundation. And then they will receive the digital copy of the magazine. The new one just came out a short while ago. And the digital copy has great advantages because there are a lot of links to things in there where you can actually watch film clips and all this kind of stuff. But then there's also now a print edition of the magazine. The $20 donation to the Film Noir Foundation does not get you the print edition of the magazine. I want to make that perfectly clear. You can buy that on Amazon as a separate thing. If you're totally into magazines like I am and you want to just hold it in your hand, you can buy it on Amazon. And as I always say, just be aware of the fact that Amazon is keeping 13 of the $14.99 sale price. $13 is going to Amazon and $1.99 is going to us. So you don't get to feel, I'm glad you like the magazine. I want you to buy the magazine in a print form, but don't feel like you're donating to the Film Noir Foundation because you're donating really to Amazon.
And you can do both because you can always, when you buy the print edition, you can kick us some money to at filmnoirfoundation.org/contribute. So don't feel shy. You can do both.
You can do both. Absolutely.
Yeah. And also just to let people know, we've started announcing quite a few of our festivals for the year. So the dates are now up at either you can do northcity.com or you can do filmnoirfoundation.org on our news page. We have that and it's really exciting because we've added Philadelphia to our festivals this year, which is new for us.
Yes. And Boston, as we record this, Boston is right around the corner. I won't be in Boston, but our esteemed colleague Foster Hirsch will be hosting the 3-day festival in Boston with a good lineup of films. And then, as you say, Philadelphia, Chicago, Detroit, Washington, D.C., all of those are back this year. So there's a lot of stuff to look forward to. And also, I'll just throw out a quick note. May 23rd is the release date for Eddie Muller's Noir Bar, cocktails
Yes.
inspired by the world of film noir. So I'm excited about that. I think it's folks will see it. I mean, it's going to get a lot of press and everything. I think Entertainment Weekly is doing a big splashy spread on the book or something. That's kind of
Oh
cool.
my goodness, so fancy.
Yeah.
You're getting so
Yeah.
fancy, Eddie.
It's good. Well, cocktails. People like to drink,
Yes, they do. I obviously will not be.
They're not
buying
going to
the
be
book.
doing that. But, well, you don't have to buy the book, Anne, because I'm going to give you one.
Oh, yay.
I'm not trying to convince you to drink again or anything, but it's a very cool looking book with a lot of great stories and stuff in it.
Oh no,
So
I still own my cocktail books because they're so
There you
pretty. It's like I
There
don't
you
want to get. I got some beautiful cocktail books, and I still have them because they're just pretty looking.
Yep. So it's not necessary. I make a point all the time to say it's not necessary to be a drinker to enjoy this book, because it's really, I tried to, that was a conscious strategy on my part. So anyway, okay, I'm glad we were able to do this, Anne. I think I have another movie that I need to go introduce.
Okay.
And out in the 100-degree heat. Thank God it's indoors.
Yes, air conditioning. That's the great thing about areas like that. They always have great air conditioning.
Exactly.
Okay,
so Tizzy didn't make an appearance, but she's around. So, and I see that neither Emily nor Charlotte were on screen today. So
no, they weren't. It's hard for them in the afternoon. That's when they have to get their important sleeping for the government done.
There you go. Cat-free zones today. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so hopefully we'll be back more on a regular schedule. I know we were out for a while, but things in both our lives got a little crazy. So we will try to get back on a more regular schedule. And I appreciate everybody's patience and for tuning back into us. It's greatly appreciated.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Say good night, Eddie.
Good night, Eddie. Until next time.